I'm so glad to have on Bad Faith podcast, long overdue, Dr. Butch Ware. You know him as Dr. Jill Stein's VP presidential running mate for the 2024 race. He is also an associate professor at UC Santa Barbara Department of History and the founder of the Initiative for the Study of Race, Religion, and Revolution. Welcome, Dr. Ware.
It's a pleasure to be here. I got to say, I'm having like a fan boy moment. As soon as Bad Faith podcast drops, I watch it in the morning, usually when I'm cooking breakfast. So this is a big moment for me.
And as I've learned, your mornings are very early and very productive and very gym-filled. And I am aspirationally looking at the way you're running your life.
I can put you on my program. It's just, and you don't have to do the first workout at 5 a.m. You can get it in any time in the day. Yeah.
I think that's for the best. If that's what it would took to get my act together, then I'd be up the creek, as they say. All right, so. Yeah. Dr. Ware, I think a lot of people might not have that much exposure to who you were prior to joining the Green Party ticket. So by way of introduction, can you tell a little bit about how you came to your politics?
Yeah. So how I came to my politics, I would say when it probably began at age 15. I read the autobiography of Malcolm X, literally cover to cover in one night. I had never been like so moved. I still teach it pretty much every year in one or another of my classes. I think it's the most powerful narrative for spiritual redemption in the English language that's ever been written in the English language. And so I converted to Islam literally by the end of that week. And that was also kind of the introduction for me to it wasn't the introduction to Black radical politics, but it was like really an initiation into Black radical politics. By the time I was 17, I had literally founded a Pan-Africanist reading group, was hanging out at, Afrocentric bookstores on the south side of Minneapolis. Ended up, going on to study African history, Islamic history, have written about in my academic work, the work of African Muslim scholars in resisting the slave trade and fighting against imperialism. My academic work has been like interconnected with my activist and organizing work, ever since I finished my PhD, 2004 and started my first job in Northwestern University. So I was doing like community teaching on the south side of Chicago when I was there. 10 years then at the University of Michigan and doing a lot of, community organizing, and especially in Detroit. And then ever since coming to UC Santa Barbara, not just in Oakland and LA, doing a lot of this, similar kind of work, but also increasingly like kind of public facing work. I think a lot of people only sort of found out about me in 2020 when I opened a social media account for the first time in the aftermath of the Floyd murders. And that was when I turned a lot of my stuff that I've been doing in kind of closed community circles, and made it visible to a broader public.
I want you to address this criticism that the Green Party broadly often gets, and specific candidates in particular get, about either being from an academic or professional background, like someone like Dr. Stein, who is obviously a medical doctor, and the broader critique of the Green Party, which is that it disappears except for every 4 years, isn't involved in organizing, features these sort of vanity runs, and maybe talk about your own life and the institute that you founded and other organizing work that you've done, and maybe the way that you grew up, and whether or not that's congruent with the sort of stereotype of who the Greens are.
Let's start with the first one, right? So, and then if I, don't answer the second one fully, you can pull me back to it. Basically you're talking about like the elitist narrative, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's going to get pinned to a lot of, so-called leftist, movements. I got a PhD, from the University of Pennsylvania, and I've taught at, top research institutes, my whole career. My father was a locksmith with a sixth grade education. When I was in third grade, one of the times that my mom put him out of the house because he had beat her, one of her conditions for letting him back in was that he take adult education classes because she said, your son reads better than you do. My mom was 15 years old when she was pregnant with me in DC, and her high school guidance counselor told her to have an abortion. And if she didn't, she would be turning tricks and strung out on heroin by the time she was 17.
Mm.
So I was raised in abject poverty in the city of Washington, D.C., back when it was still Chocolate City, 95% Black. Um, and all I can say about that is if, going on to get a PhD and teaching at Research One institutions after, literally not living at the same street address for a calendar year until I was
Mm.
9 years old, if that makes me an elitist, then y'all don't know what that word means. That um, and I'll just say another thing about that to kind of return it and connect it to the second point, which is more broadly about the Green Party. My own particular iteration of Black excellence is not about individual success. It's about building community solidarity, community strength, and like working from a space of, Black liberation politics, not Black identity politics. So I've always been somebody that tried to follow in the mold of like a Huey P. Newton or Bobby Seale, who were really, really good at talking to working class white folks, that were really good at building, coalition. A lot of people forget, the first Rainbow Coalition was literally like Black Panther Party plus all of the other, parties that the Black Panthers were in coalition with. So that kind of brings me to the Green Party, right? The Massachusetts Green Party, for example, is literally the Green Rainbow Party, right? Because it's still left over from that original Rainbow Coalition that has then, since been merged with Greens, and that's as good in as any. To talk about the fact that the Green Party has been building, like, at the community level, at the grassroots level, running for local elected office, like literally from the beginning, like founding at Macalester, College in St. Paul in 1984. And that's also, by the way, part of my story. So I moved from DC to the south side of Minneapolis when I was young, and actually grew up on the south side of Minneapolis. And to this point, my closest friend, my best friend, himself of indigenous background, his mom also of indigenous background. Sean Young, my best friend growing up in Minneapolis, his mom, Annie Young, was the first Green Party elected official in the state of Minnesota.
Mm.
She was elected in 1989. Okay, and she
Mm.
served in the city of Minneapolis on the Park and Recreation Board until probably 2012. God rest her soul. And so, like, I learned from Annie Young that, like, it's about doing the work, not about getting the publicity. And a lot of Green Party, public servants, and I insist, in kind of campaign meetings and in meetings with, Green Party organizers around the country, that we never accept the label politicians. Because what I learned is that, the Green Party doesn't have politicians. Green Party has public servants. We might have elected officials, but we ain't got no politicians. And so I
Mm.
think that there's a lot of public servants, a lot of, elected officials that don't get the shine, right? Because we don't have a budget to be running national ads, even during an election year, much less like just telling you about what the local park and recreation board, person is doing, or the city councilman or so forth. So, yeah, I mean, I think that both of those are trash narratives, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, it is frustrating to hear people on the left in particular who ostensibly are very aware of the role that money plays in politics and were, for example, very excited about the relative independence of someone like Bernie Sanders because he didn't accept those kinds of donations,
Mm-hmm.
then criticize the Green Party for not having the kind of reach or exposure that obviously is driven by money and also not be supporting the Green Party themselves financially. Yeah.
It's a completely disingenuous argument. And like AOC, AOC Pelosi, as I like to call her, is a perfect example, right? She want to take shots at Jill and, by extension, myself, when she was literally out canvassing for Green Party candidates a couple years before. It's like, child, please, like, stop wasting people's time with that nonsense.
Well, look, I'm glad you brought that up because to the extent that I introduced you by saying, tell me about your background, people might not be super aware of who you are and what you've been doing prior to joining the Jill Stein campaign. They certainly learned a great deal about you after that super viral Breakfast Club interview.
I am personally offended by the way that Blackness is being weaponized in this electoral cycle in order to justify white supremacist genocide in Gaza.
Expound.
Please. Yeah.
Malcolm said of Zionism, of the Zionist state, the Israeli state, he said that this is a white Jewish population, the Ashkenazi population, being given power by white imperialists to remove brown Arabs from their land. He said, so therefore Zionism is white supremacy.
We've talked about it on the show. I think most of the audience is aware of what the Breakfast Club is, but it's one of the most popular and listened to radio shows, in particular Black radio shows in the country. And it is the venue where many an American politician has crashed and burned. Hillary Clinton's famous hot sauce in the bag comment happened there. Kamala Harris chuckling about how she listened to, who was it, Tupac in college while she was smoking pot. And it turned out that Tupac hadn't dropped his first album until she was already graduated. All of these little mini scandals that happened during the 2020 cycle.
Her whole cosplay blackness thing. I mean, listen, the Breakfast Club, you will reveal whether you are like culturally Black or not. Let's just be real about that. So yeah.
Yeah, well, you did amazingly. And I think it's partly because you had a real genuine sincerity and connection to the issues and a connection to the community that could not be suppressed despite efforts by Angela Rye. So I want to ask you a little bit about what you knew going into that interview and, you know, what we might not be aware of happening behind the scenes, especially given that Angela Rye, as I understand it, is not a regular part of that show. She's someone who seems to have been called in to basically represent the Democratic Party.
Yeah. So this is an excellent question, and no one has asked this on the air. And again, you know, going back to my fanboy moment, you know, like this is the kind of question that I expect from Briahna Joy Gray. Okay, so this is outstanding. So literally the night before, you know, they ask us for like, you know, an agenda of things that we want to discuss. And they actually tell us that, you know, it's going to be the ordinary cast. And so they for sure know by then that that's not the case. So there's either some kind of deception or there's an intentional break or an unintentional break in the chain of communication, because we were essentially given the impression that it was our opportunity to kind of lay out the platform. And the person who brokered that conversation. So first of all, is a close friend of mine who has, you know, Charlemagne's number. That's how we got the interview in the first place. I was like, I'm not going to name the individual because it's not particularly, you know, important, but a good friend of mine for years. I was like, you know, so, hey, you know, like brothers running for VP, like text your boy. And so he did. And they were open to it. So he texted back, you know, same guy that day is like, yeah, they want your, you know, kind of what you guys want to discuss. And, you know, as far as I know, like that, it's just the ordinary cast. So when I walked in and seen Angela there, I knew it was a hit. And, you know, so I was cool with that, you know, like, to be perfectly honest, like, you know, I was expecting the unexpected, and I'm always expecting the unexpected. So, you know, when Angela came in, you know, to carry out her assigned and, you know, I'm presumably like, you know, well remunerated hit job, you know, it didn't catch me off balance. And the other thing is, I'll just say about this is that, you know, in addition to like the authenticity, like you can't fake where and how I grew up. You know, you can't fake, the fact that I memorized every single rap song that came out between 1982 and 1994. You know what I mean? Like, you know, people can do whatever they want, you know, with that. But like, if you start any Rakim bar, I'm going to finish that bar. If you start any Tribe bar, I'm going to finish that bar. So part of what's coming across is the fact that that some of us are doing cosplay blackness like Kamala is, and others of us, you know, we ain't new to this, we true to this. So that's one. But another thing is that I lived in West Africa for years. I did my PhD research in West Africa with like spiritual specialists who believe that like the way that you make knowledge beneficial is by pairing it with character training. So when I seen them acting a plain fool in that way, I stayed on my training and tried to keep my composure. And instead of responding, you know, you don't fight fire with fire, you fight fire with water. Right. So, you know, over and over again, just trying to be patient and, you know, remembering that, you know, like if this woman is going to show everybody who she is, let her. And
that's so important.
And it's our job to, you know, Dr. Jill and myself to show the world who we are.
That's so important. And I think for me, one of the standout moments was, and we'll put the clip in here because I'm about to bastardize whatever it is that you said, but you accused sort of liberals broadly and Angela Rye tacitly of engaging in white supremacist talking points. I think actually Jill Stein made this argument.
Well, I would like to respond. Yeah. This is the framing of the empire and the oligarchy and white supremacy and colonialism, which wants you to feel that resistance is futile. This is about voter blaming and voter shaming.
Let me just No. What you're not going to say is that I'm ever parroting anything at the hands of white supremacy. This is something that's very different. This is me asking you, again, it's a binary choice in an election.
I'm just pointing out that these are the talking points.
No, it's not
the same talking points that the DNC
I didn't get my talking
uses.
This is not DNC talking points. This is my research. And sadly for you, the research says you have never won an election. You have been successful in pushing forward certain agendas as an advocate, but you have never won an election as a candidate.
Is
that a winning strategy?
So in order to win, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. And in this case, it's many steps. Let me point out, please, you need to compare the Green Party, not with those who are taking money from AIPAC and the War Machine and Wall Street. You've got to compare us, you have to compare us to other grassroots, non-corporate.
She told me I'm a white supremacist. She said I was parroting the talking points of a white supremacist.
See, that was my disappointment.
May I finish, please? May I get to my point? May I please get to my point?
Dr. Stein and Angela Rye close it up.
Let me finish, please. Thank you.
And I think because it came out of Dr. Stein's mouth, who's white, Angela seemed to bristle. And the way you two tag teamed in that moment, and you were there to provide support and substantiation and real credibility to the argument that Jill Stein made. It was really a 1-2 punch that was impressive. And to your point a moment ago, the sort of consistency and kind of courage, willingness to not back down, and sort of grace and evenness that you both demonstrated during that interview really was a perfect foil for Angela Rye, and her agenda became very stark, very obvious. And in those sorts of situations, when you're walking into the hornet's den, that's sort of the best. That's the best you can get, is to let other people show themselves. I mean, relatedly, we were talking about this a little bit prior to starting recording. And the last day or so, a clip of Ta-Nehisi Coates, formerly a staff writer at The Atlantic, who has also had a career over the last few years in Hollywood, writing for, what was the Black Panther movie, or doing these comic books, and now has come back with a new book that addresses, I think, 3 central issues, one of which is Israel-Palestine. And that is the subject which is getting the most media attention for obvious reasons. And he did an appearance on CBS yesterday on the morning show, which is usually a pretty soft and easy environment for authors to go on.
Ta-Nehisi, I want to dive into the Israel-Palestine section of the book. It's the largest section of the book. And I have to say, when I read the book, I imagine if I took your name out of it, took away the awards and the acclaim, took the cover off the book, the publishing house goes away, the content of that section would not be out of place in the backpack of an extremist. And so then I found myself wondering, why does Ta-Nehisi Coates, who I've known for a long time, read his work for a long time, very talented, smart guy, leave out so much? Why leave out that Israel is surrounded by countries that want to eliminate it? Why leave out that Israel deals with terror groups that want to eliminate it? Why not detail anything of the first and the second intifada, the cafe bombings, the bus bombings, the little kids blown to bits? And is it because you just don't believe that Israel, in any condition, has a right to exist?
Well, I would say the perspective that you just outlined, there is no shortage of that perspective in American media. That's the first thing I would say. I am most concerned always with those who don't have a voice, with those who don't have the ability to talk. I have asked repeatedly in my interviews whether there is a single network, mainstream organization in America with a Palestinian American bureau chief or correspondent who actually has a voice to articulate their part of the world. I've been a reporter for 20 years. The reporters of those who believe more sympathetically about Israel and its right to exist don't have a problem getting their voice out. But what I saw in Palestine, what I saw on the West Bank, what I saw in Haifa in Israel, what I saw in the South Hebron Hills, those were the stories that I have not heard. And those were the stories that I was most occupied with. I wrote a 260-page book. It is not a treatise on the entirety of the conflict between the Palestinians and the Israelis.
But if you were to read this book, you would be left wondering, why does any of Israel exist? What a horrific place, committing horrific acts on a daily basis. So I think the question is central and key. If Israel has a right to exist, and if your answer is no, then I guess the question becomes, why do the Palestinians have a right to exist? Why do 20 different Muslim countries have a right to exist?
My answer is that no country in this world establishes its ability to exist through rights. Countries establish their ability to exist through force, as America did. And so I think this question of right to Israel does exist. It's a fact. The question of its right is not a question that I would be faced with any other country.
But you write a book that delegitimizes the pillars of Israel. It seems like an effort to topple the whole building of it. So I come back to the question, and it's what I struggled with throughout this book. What is it that so particularly offends you about the existence of a Jewish state that is a Jewish safe place and not any of the other states out there?
There's nothing that offends me about a Jewish state. I am offended by the idea of states built on ethnocracy, no matter where they are.
Muslim included.
I would not want a state where any group of people laid down their citizenship rights based on ethnicity. The country of Israel is a state in which half the population exists on one tier of citizenship, and everybody else that's ruled by Israelis exists on another tier, including Palestinian Israeli citizens. The only people that exist on that first tier are Israeli Jews. Why do we support that? Why is that okay? I'm the child of Jim Crow. I'm the child of people that were born into a country where that was exactly the case, of American apartheid. I walk over there and I walk through the occupied territories and I walk down the street in Hebron. And a guy says to me, I can't walk down the street unless I profess my religion. I'm with another path. No. I want to. This is very, very important.
It is important. It is
extremely important.
Yeah, let me lay it down.
I'm working with the person that is guiding me is a Palestinian whose father, whose grandfather and grandmother was born in this town. And I have more freedom to walk than he does. He can't ride on certain roads. He can't get water in the same way that Israeli citizens who live less than a mile away from him can.
And why
is that okay?
Why is that? Why is there no agency in this book for the Palestinians? They exist in your narrative merely as victims of the Israelis, as though they were not offered peace at any juncture, as though they don't have a stake in this as well. What is their role in the lack of a Palestinian?
I have a very, 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 very moral compass about this. And again, perhaps it's because of my ancestry. Either apartheid is right or it's wrong. It's really, really simple. Either what I saw was right or it's wrong.
They brought in a hitman too, didn't they?
Exactly. That's the exact parallel that I wanted to bring up, which is that the optics of, well, tell me what you made of the optics of the two Black journalists, one of whom is Gayle King, who is probably the most famous person. It's ostensibly, I think, her show.
Yep.
But how the interview actually played out, given that most of the questions, overwhelmingly, if not basically, and all the substantive questions came from this person who seemed to be a sort of a pro-establishment Zionist plant.
Yeah, pro-establishment Zionist plant. And let's not forget white supremacist. I mean, Zionism is white supremacy. Malcolm said so, Kwame Ture said so, James Baldwin said so, Angela Davis, before she sold out, said so, Toni Morrison said so. Assata Shakur said so, Thomas Sankara said so, Nelson Mandela said so. So the first thing to just say is that when you have, Black folks caping up for white supremacy because they don't have a sound reading on what Zionism actually is, like that's a huge fundamental problem. Because the optics of it, there's a song that I used in the background on some of my social media reels. I'm going to jump down, turn around, pick a bale of cotton. Going to jump down, turn around, pick a bale a day. Like they're literally just shucking and jiving for massa is all they're doing. They are playing the role that they were sent and assigned to play. The Democrats, the liberals say jump, and the Black media establishment say how high, boss. Like Malcolm said, Master say we sick. Or Master say he's sick, and you say, we sick, boss? And that's literally exactly what they do. They come in to fill in and make things easier and more comfortable for the white supremacist class. So that hit job was exactly the same hit job, except it was more poorly executed even than the Angela Rye one, because the optics of having this white supremacist asking these questions of Ta-Nehisi Coates look even worse than Angela Rye coming at Dr. Jill, because the racial dynamics of the interaction are flipped. So it was a disaster, and it's the exact same thing, right? Is that literally all you have to do is show up as yourself, keep your composure, and speak truth, and these murderers and genocide enablers will show the American public exactly how morally depraved they really are, because they have no argument to stand on. And instead, they just have to interrupt you and argue with you and, debase themselves publicly. And just to return to the Angela Rye piece, right, is that if we had been given that unfettered opportunity to present our platform, it could not have done the work for us that her hit job did. Neither could Ta-Nehisi Coates have done better publicity for his book just by being able to present the basic argument of his book than the free publicity that they gave him by shucking and jiving for the Black co-host and by playing full-on Leonardo DiCaprio in Django, because that's what the dude that was doing the interview was doing.
Yeah, I mean, the optics, I do wonder. I do wonder what was going through the head of Gayle King, and I'm not sure the name of the other.
Is it Nate Burleson? Though he's a former. I think he's a former football player, Nate Burleson. Yeah.
Oh, okay, all right, that makes sense. He has the look of a bone structure and poise and good posture of an athlete. Yeah,
and the completely flat uninformed politics, right, as well.
Right. So I don't want to. Frankly, I don't expect. Well, maybe I should have higher expectations. Expect is not the right word. But realistically speaking, I am inured to the reality that people in some of these hosting positions, especially morning show positions, aren't necessarily going to be especially well informed. But that's why your ears should perk up when they say, okay, we're sending in a ringer.
Right.
We're sending in somebody else. And what does that mean if you're in the position of hosting a show? Like, who is the person that's coming in to ask these kinds of questions? And, these interviews, it was a 6-minute clip. We obviously are playing a part of it. But I would hope that at very least after the interview, the others take some time to inform themselves in a way that they clearly were not able to be able to provide some pushback even to their co-host, who really embarrassed himself. I mean, from the moment Coates was introduced, I think the opener was something like, if I read the 3rd chapter of your book,
I would think it came out of an extremist backpack. Yeah,
exactly. Basically, saying that Ta-Nehisi Coates a terrorist.
They called Ta-Nehisi Coates Al Qaeda. That's what they did, and which is exactly as crazy as it sounds, right? I mean, it's exactly as crazy as it sounds. Can I just let me just say something about this to go back to the breakfast, because to be honest, you're the first person that actually asked me for a debrief on the air about that. So one of the things I'll just say is that, like, I was actually really, really impressed by the way that Charlemagne and DJ Envy handled themselves in that interview, to be perfectly honest. Like, Charlemagne asked questions. Charlemagne, I took the brother's number, he took mine. Like, I text him from time to time because, he's very, very good at what he does. And I don't love that they brought Candace Owens on and other, but the thing is that, like, I understand the media environment in which they work. And I think that we should ask for, like, introspection, from people who essentially do, kind of entertainment and cultural, stuff when something that comes out from outside the kind of ordinary political bubble that they're existing in, when they ask questions about it, like, that's a sign of intellectual integrity. It's a sign of intellectual curiosity. I hope that Nate Burleson would at least, engage in that. I do not expect that from Gayle King, because that to me is also a bought and paid for operative. So that's
why do you say that? Simply because of her relationship with Oprah and the fact that she has been able to get the opportunities that she has, and the position that she's in means that she is sort of
outrageous levels of cash flow through those democratic funding mechanisms. And if you just start going through, and again, this is literally just my spot assessment, but I'm running back in my head, all of the different kind of fundraisers that network has been associated with. I'm sorry, that Oprah's network has been associated with, not her media network, but her social network. It's very, very clear to me that my good friend Imam Dawood Walid, who's the executive director of CARE, Michigan Council on American Islamic Relations, he likes to say, "Who funds you runs you," and there's little more that needs to be said about the way that the Team Blues patronage networks function than that.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because we were kind of having a conversation about the risks and limitations of a professional managerial class of Black faces in high places, which was an interesting bookend to the question I asked you in the beginning, which is, what do you say to people who are skeptical of your own background in academia? Can you deepen their understanding of what your background really is? And now I find myself reflecting on Angela Rye and the Breakfast Club, the different kind of approaches between someone like Charlamagne and Angela. I'm thinking about the silence of the host in the context of the Ta-Nehisi Coates interview. I'm thinking about them versus Coates himself, right? Who has had an interesting trajectory as someone who, I think he was so effective in part because of the esteem and the trust that liberal mainstream predominantly white America has invested him in as the scribe of the Obama years. And it's not just that he...
Hold on, the scribe of the Obama years. That is such a dope summary.
The black scribe of the Obama years, right? Which is a position to his credit that he has said he felt uncomfortable with and motivated in part his choice to sort of leave American politics and do creative ventures for the last few years and live in Europe and exit the public eye into this point. But it's an interesting trajectory because he was convincing, he was persuasive, not just because of the rhetoric he deployed to parry the Zionist talking points, which was exemplary. I want to be very clear, but also because of who he is, the purchase that he has earned or been given by white America as someone who is the race expert TM in the United States of America. And when he drew the analogies between the fate of Palestinians and the state of Palestinian lives and U.S. apartheid and said, all I know is that apartheid is apartheid and apartheid is wrong, and I saw it with my own eyes, it seemed to me that it implicated his standing as the expert on race relations in America. And to push back on that point, which many other people have done, right? Many a time these conversations devolve into, well, it's not really apartheid. Israel is 20% Muslim. We've all heard the talking points. But it seemed like part of why he was able to control the conversation, control the narrative, is because of the goodwill that he has earned or been given, been foisted upon him when it comes to race relations and tying those two things together. If I am wrong about Palestine, am I also wrong about Black America? Mm-hmm. And are you, a white person who has told me that I'm the expert on Black America, really able to say that to me?
So it's a really interesting, this is a really deep question. So Huey P. Newton drew this distinction between the endorsed spokesman and the implacable when he talked about Black resistance figures. And if you look at what Ta-Nehisi is trying to, execute, it is a very, very delicate move to move from the category of the endorsed spokesman into that of the implacable resistance figure. And that's precisely what he's trying to do. So if we really want to delve into it, and I feel like this is one of the few places that I could, right, is in this space, is that a huge part of the disappointment with the response to Kamala, and I'll try to say her name right, Angie.
Yes, them being more upset with you about the pronunciation of Kamala than the actual genocide that she is supporting was a true low point of that interview. But I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so a part of the lesson that should be inherent in it is that we actually already have the example of Obama. We already have the example of the black-faced white imperialist. And so Ta-Nehisi distancing himself from that legacy is a sign of like intellectual, integrity, right? Because that's a very difficult thing to do. Usually people throw good money after bad, and they throw good integrity, after bad decisions. Like, that's a bar, actually. I need to write that down. But I mean, they throw their integrity away because of bad decisions that they made in the past, and they double down on those. So first of all, I would love the opportunity to have a conversation with Ta-Nehisi Coates. Would love that opportunity, because his decision to sort of repent of the way that he, utilized, examples from like Israeli institutions as model institutions in his previous, kind of academic writing, the way that he's, kind of distanced himself from that Obama legacy. That's like a salutary. Go ahead.
In the case of reparations, I think you're alluding to the fact that when he's running through the ways that reparations have been paid to other groups that aren't Black Americans historically, he references the founding of Israel post-Holocaust as a example ostensibly that we can look to and follow. And what he says, and I got to say this again, because shout out to friend of the show, Briahna Joy Gray, he says, and it's written up in this New York magazine piece that just went so viral this past week, that it was Rania shouting at him about why that was wrong at an event that he did that caused him to ruminate on this particular issue and ultimately resulted in the book and the media performances that we're seeing and like complimenting today.
And that's fantastic. I was actually unaware that that Rania's intervention did that. I mean, sometimes you just gotta throw a shoe at somebody. Like like sometimes you just gotta throw a shoe at somebody. My wife's Mexican American, and I learned that this is like, it's not just an Arab, cultural thing. It's, it's not just a thing that, Black people will do. It's also like, apparently, like, this is a universal people of color.
Yes,
like,
la chancleta.
Exactly. You're going to get hit with this chocolate if you don't watch out. So, by the way, my wife has never thrown a shoe at me. Just for the record, we're just discussing, cultural things. But all of that is just to say, like, for me, Rania doing that is the equivalent of, that throwing that shoe at George Bush, right? And it wasn't a wake-up call for George Bush, but it was a wake-up call for Ta-Nehisi Coates. And that is a sign of like that moral integrity. And I just want to go back on that particular point. Ta-Nehisi Coates being willing to like reassess this is really, really crucial. And I just want to also signal this. So in October, so literally, I think it was October 11th, I spoke at an event. I was the only speaker at the event. It was my event. It was Black and Palestinian Solidarity. So within 4 days of the beginning of the genocide, I'm doing organizing. And on October 21st, I organized a student march across campus, and a liberation concert. Now, remember October 21st, how everybody is still in the old way of thinking that if you say, like Mark Lamont Hill did, from the river to the sea, you're going to get fired. So we're walking across campus with 300 students talking about free Palestine, right? And this is going to circle back to Ta-Nehisi Coates in the following way. Like, so the Zionists came for my job before the month was out. They wrote an open letter to the provost, to the chancellor of the university, sent it to every department head, called me a virulent anti-Semite, all of these other, nonsensical claims, right? And that went nowhere. But one of the few people that I saw, right, if you go back to that time period when everybody was quiet and afraid, was Ta-Nehisi Coates, Michelle Alexander, Mohammed El-Kurd. They're doing the We Must Speak event, which was major, and that showed not just the intellectual integrity but the courage. So
yeah, it's so frustrating. It's such a difficult thing because I've really wrestled with both of those figures, both Michelle Alexander and Ta-Nehisi Coates, because I remember back in 2016, I think it was 2016, yeah, Michelle Alexander, when the whole world was, you got to vote for Hillary, the narratives against Bernie Sanders were out of control, and they were very racialized, right? It was very much Black people don't like Bernie, so you can't do. I mean, I
which is crazy, but go ahead. Yeah,
absolutely. People who listen to the show know that my whole career moving to journalism and media was largely because I was sitting at my 12-person law firm, my boutique law firm, the only non-white associate, who was being told by all my white coworkers every single day that Black people don't like Bernie and that I had to get on board with Hillary Clinton. Like the dissonance, the math wasn't mathing. And then Michelle Alexander wrote this article in The Nation about why Hillary Clinton didn't deserve the Black vote. Yep. And it was so important. It felt at the time to be so important for an established, respected academic, someone who had the same kind of cultural capital with white liberals as Ta-Nehisi Coates, having written with the new Jim Crow, which was like one of the first big like racial reckoning books of the Obama era, one of the biggest ones, to say, look, I'm not telling you guys how to vote, but like Hillary Clinton doesn't deserve it.
I still teach that book in my hip hop history class, right? Just for context. So continue. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, I mean, it's somewhere on one of these bookshelves beside me over there. But it mattered to me. Now, at the time, even though I was so grateful for that article, she didn't say anything about Bernie, right? Like, you know, you can't force people to have your exact same politics. But similarly, at the time, Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote The Case for Reparations and very famously called out Bernie Sanders' stance on reparations. Now, I disagree with Bernie Sanders' stance on reparations. Right. I also disagreed with Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, who had the identical stance on reparations. Right. But it felt that critique was being weaponized against Bernie in this very specific way.
Well, yeah, it was a selective deployment of the argument. Yes, exactly.
And I was an anonymous citizen at the time with fewer than 500 Twitter followers, but I tweeted a lot. I was very bored at my law firm job. And I tweeted at Ta-Nehisi Coates and I said, I saw you say in another tweet thread somewhere that you are actually planning to vote for Bernie because your son had urged you to. Mm-hmm. Will you write about this? Because whether or not you intended to do so, your article, Case for Reparations, is being used as an excuse to advance a Hillary Clinton campaign, which are antithetical to your ideals. And his response to me, he responded to me, which I was very much fangirl, but his response was, he said, I can't write everything you should write. More voices should be in the conversation. Facts. Now, this is my villain origin story. Because while within 6
more hero origin story.
Well, depending on who you talk to. Yeah. But, I started trying to freelance and pitch within 6 months, and it started to take off within a year. But the problem was, I wanted Ta-Nehisi Coates to write it the same way that I value that Michelle Alexander wrote it, and the same reason I value Ta-Nehisi Coates saying what he said on CBS, because it's about
where your standing matters. Yep.
Exactly. Where your standing matters. And even today, having obviously more of a platform than I had back then, I'm not Ta-Nehisi Coates, right? Like, because I said it, there are people who are not going to like what I say.
Neither am I. So yeah, it matters.
What do you make of that? Like, in this moment, I think it's genuinely courageous what he's doing. Yeah. It is also true that maybe he went away and he has this, what do they call it? FU money. He doesn't really need anything else. He has a path in the creative industries where maybe he's relatively safe. All of those things can be true. But speaking of this and like the different positions that Black elites and professional managerial class hold in public space, I also wanted to ask you about what's been going on with Keith Ellison, who is a personal friend or colleague of yours, or someone who moves in the same circles of
long-time acquaintance, and we share a number of close mutual friends. Keith and I have never been close friends, but we've always been friendly, and that's a relationship that goes back at least a decade, if not more.
As Black Muslim men in Minneapolis, this connection, and you meant so I want to talk a little bit about the campaign and the race for a second here, because absolutely. The reason Keith Ellison came into the picture, because there was this moment a couple of weeks ago where the guns were out for the Green Party, all the knives were out. AOC did her hit video on Instagram Reels or what have you. Which
backfired the same way that Angela Rise did, but go ahead,
I think that's entirely right. And Keith Ellison was one of the people that was weaponized with what feel like very specific talking points to diminish the interest in the Green Party. So I want to ask you about why you think that's happening from a kind of polling perspective.
Oh, yeah.
And then specifically talk to me about what you make of Keith Ellison's attack on you, given your personal relationship and his standing in the community, not just as a a Black Muslim man, but as someone who has had, relatively progressive politics in the space of the Democratic Party, and someone who himself was very much railroaded out of being DNC chair because of the establishment Democrats that he is now aligning himself with.
Right. So to zoom out, and I'll come back to the polling in just a second, so Keith Ellison's, sort of problem is emblematic actually of like the Obama approach overall. Obama, just to for a little bit of context, Obama did not have to kowtow to the Democratic establishment. He had built his own, electoral juggernaut, his own email list. He had, kind of pioneered uses of social media. And because he was not actually steeped in the Black radical tradition, when he got into power, he just handed everything that he had built over to the establishment wing of the Democratic Party. He could have broken and destroyed them. We do not actually have to be in the moment where we are. Obama did not have enough fight in him. And this is similar to a lot of these, Democrats, people like Keith Ellison, who get abused by the Democrat power structure. And nonetheless, because they are afraid of being cut off from the sources of funding and the sources of electoral access, they nonetheless go running back to their dope dealer for their next fix. Okay, because they are hooked on that Democrat money. So the Democrats predominantly do it with the carrot, and the Republicans predominantly do it with the stick. When you get out of party discipline on Trump's side, he puts a tweet out about you, and literally people are coming for your life within days, if not weeks, right? So they do it with the stick. With the Democrats, it's the money, stupid. Like that's always the answer. It's always the money. It's always the campaign funds. It's always being cut off from the tap so that they have to do what they're told. So now going back to the broader question, why the coordinated hit from AOC Pelosi, George Takei, Keith Ellison, all coming at the same time and all coming with the exact same language, which, by the way, was weak tea. I mean, like they had nothing. It's an easily rebutted argument. It just shows, to return back to something that you said before, is that when Jill and I are coming, when Dr. Jill and I are coming with a 1-2 punch, it's very difficult to land a glove on us. Where do you have to be standing to hit a white anti-Zionist Jewish woman, in her early 70s, and a Black Muslim scholar, a radical, I did just hit 50. Even light-skinned Black don't crack. I know that, beige don't age is what Mark Lamont Hill said. And I was like, that's a bar. So, but the point is that our differential positions, but complementary positions, make it very difficult to land actual attacks on us, right? So their attack was very weak, but it was also very clearly coordinated. And the reason why it was happening was something that I brought to the campaign as soon as I got onto the campaign, because 20 years of community building, relationship building in the Muslim community. One of the first meetings that I took was with Dalia Mugahed, who was the senior researcher at the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding in DC. And she came in with the following numbers. I knew this the week that I was on the campaign, literally the third day that I was on the campaign. The states of Georgia, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, okay, are demographically essentially the same. There's more Arabs in Michigan, with respect to Black population and Muslim population. There's more Arabs in Michigan, but a lot of them are Christians. So if you're just thinking about things in terms of Muslims and Black folks, very, very similar demographics, okay? So in the states of Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Georgia, Joe Biden got 65% of the vote in 2020. And he cannot win any of those 3 swing states without every last one of those votes. Those are very narrow.
65% of the Muslim vote?
The Muslim vote. Sorry. Yes. Yeah. Thank you for specifying. 65% of the Muslim vote in all of 3 of these states. By January 2024, he was polling at 12% in those places. And 12. Wow. From 65 to 12. And as soon as I saw that, I was like, oh, dead man walking. They know that they can't win the election. And by the way, that when those numbers came, the Green Party wasn't tapped into those numbers. I brought those networks on. That, by the way, is right when Jamie Harrison made the first run at Jill. Is that they're realizing that they are in trouble and they have to do something. So when I came onto the ticket, that becomes multiplied exponentially. Their problem is now that instead of the people falling for the uncommitted okie doke, which is really just a way of getting people that should be voting third party to not vote at all, and that Democratic leadership was actually responsible for sponsoring the uncommitted movement to kind of keep the third party momentum from gathering. Now, a lot of people in the Muslim community see like even more reason to be jumping on Jill Stein's campaign. So that's the reason for the coordinated attack, because their polling then started to even go worse than that. So Council of American Islamic Relations about 3 weeks ago showed Jill and Kamala running 29%, 29%. This is after nationwide. This is right after I come on the ticket. Then less than a week later, we're ahead in Wisconsin and Arizona in polling in the Muslim community. Now, hasn't been released yet. Yaqeen Institute out of Texas, their most recent polling says that 53% of the Muslim community nationwide is going third party, with 80% of that coming to the Green Party, 15% support for Kamala, 4% for Trump. So it's fascinating because they know what I knew. They can't win. And everybody is saying you're throwing your vote away voting green, you're throwing your vote away voting blue. They are dead already. They're a zombie, dead man walking. And if you vote green instead, you are actually consolidating power in a viable third party option that can then leverage against both Team Blue and Team Red. So I told the people inside the campaign, listen, y'all can keep punching down at the Democrats if you want. I'm punching at the Republicans instead. The Democrats are already dead. I'm not beating a dead horse. I'm coming for the Bernie Trump voters, and I'm coming for the Trump voters, because I think that, to be perfectly honest, the narrative that has emerged that all Trump voters are inveterate racists is a Democrat talking point that is like nonsense. The truth is that Trump himself is a pure racist and white supremacist. He's shown that throughout his career. And the true racists and white supremacists do all, run in for the Trump talk. But the overwhelming majority of Trump supporters, in my neighborhood, in my community, Blacks for Trump, Latins for Trump, are not inveterate racists. Neither are many of the white folks that support him, and Asian voters and others. It's just that they actually see no moral difference between blue criminals and red criminals. And all other things being equal, they'd rather pay less in their personal income tax.
Yeah, I think that's a hard lesson that Democrats sort of refused to learn after 2016. Like 2017 was like an entire year of think pieces trying to explain away the sort of Bernie to Trump, the Obama to Bernie to Trump voter.
Obama to Bernie to Trump, exactly.
And it's not that, obviously, racism being what it is can be defined and expressed in a million different ways. And, I would argue that we all have forms of bias and prejudice that we wrestle with every day.
We're all swimming in white supremacy all the time. That's what I mean when I say inveterate racist. I mean, like, these are not Klan, people that attend Klan rallies. They don't explicitly hate Black people the way that they're being. Yeah,
and importantly, for the sake of pushing back against what the Democratic narrative is around Trump, even if you think they're racist in their hearts or whatever, the racism was not the but-for cause of their vote, because they at one time did vote for Obama. So it's not that you can't vote for Obama and be racist, but if Democrats are trying to excuse why they lost the election on racism, well, that's not a good enough excuse, because the racists were fine with Barack Hussein Obama.
Incredibly important point that you just made. Yeah, go ahead.
At least like a electorally significant, dispositive group of them obviously did. So I really appreciate that point, and I think a lot of people who are listening, especially a lot of people who identify as independents, there are listeners who came over from Rising who are more right leaning, but who appreciate a critique of a corporate status quo. I think there is a lane, and I think RFK Jr.'s popularity, frankly, kind of coming out of nowhere, is evidence of the power in running down a genuine, sincere populist lane. I did also just want to note a couple of things with respect to polls. There was this Alyssa Slotkin scoop from yesterday noting that Harris is underwater in Michigan.
I'm not feeling my best right now about where we are on Kamala Harris in a place like Michigan right now. We have her underwater in our polling. I'm not feeling my best right now about where we are on Kamala Harris in a place like Michigan right now. We have her underwater in our polling. I'm not feeling my best right now about where we are on Kamala Harris in a place like Michigan right now. We have her underwater in our polling.
This is
they can't win Michigan. And by the way, I'm headed to Michigan, for 4 days. We're going to turn Michigan green. That's easy. That's easy. Yeah, go ahead.
And there are apparently 80,000 Lebanese American voters in Michigan. 80,000.
What did I just say? We're gonna turn Michigan green.
Yeah, I mean, if you looking at these poll numbers, and looking at the Democratic Party's choice to continue the way that they've been continuing, when the historical examples of Reagan, I've heard Jill Stein tongue in cheek referred to him as peacemaker Reagan. So progressive in the scope of contemporary politics, Reagan picking up the phone and saying, Israel, what you're doing in Lebanon amounts to a Holocaust, using that particular word and saying you have to stop, really shows you how far to the right.
What are they doing? They're literally going in with a full-on invasion now, and the press is covering it. Ground troops. They everything except calling it what it is, an invasion. So yeah, the same thing is happening, and the Democrats are doubling down on it, and they're dead. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to ask, do you think that there are, because of the deep and personal reaction the Muslim community is having to what's happening in American community is happening in Gaza, and West Bank and Lebanon, that there is more potential for a longer term political engagement beyond this election cycle than the other sorts of issues that sometimes animate folks during campaigns? Do you think we're ripe for a dirty break, at least on a sort of religious, ethnic, cultural level, with the Democratic Party that will sustain? And also, I'd like to speak to the proportion of Muslim voters in America who are Black, and what that means about some of these crosstabs and the way that Black voter support for Kamala Harris dipping might be related to these Muslim numbers.
Yeah, so let's go in reverse order. This is one of the biggest misconceptions. So in those numbers that I talked about before from Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Georgia, there's a kind of basic demographic fact that is concealed, because of the way the media represents things, which is that Black Muslims are still the single largest ethnic contingent in the American Muslim community, period, full stop. So when the Democrats think that they're going to survive by making an appeal to Black voters, they forget that there are lots of Black Muslims just like me and to go back to the first part of the question, listen, I don't have to guess at this. I've heard this literally hundreds of times, directly, in person, in comments, on social media posts. These are people that will never, ever vote for a Democrat again, ever, at any point in their life, ever, never, ever. And the reason is the same reason is that, will a Jew ever vote for the Nazis? It's never going to happen. They're dead. They're done. They are going the way of the Whigs. They cannot survive what they have done to themselves. That party is going to be in shambles, broken and shattered in November. There is no surviving what their hands have wrought. And as I said on Democracy Now! With Amy Goodman, anyone that tries to shield them from accountability for the evil that they themselves have done is complicit in the evil. You are the silencer at the end of their gun. So all of these people in mainstream media, they're going to be remembered the way that the Vichy regime is remembered in France. They are going to be remembered as collaborating with Nazis, except it is worse. because we are actually the ones driving the genocide. This is our weapons, our policy. This is American imperialism being laundered through Israel so that it can have an anti-Semitic tag sticking to it, and it doesn't stick to the emperor who's stark naked. And the emperor that's stark naked is Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Team Blue, Team Red, all the same genociders. In this election, yeah, go ahead. We actually have an opportunity to consolidate power. And this goes back to your first part of your question. Kwame Ture said people usually mobilize around issues. That's what happened after the Floyd murder, and that's why we've ended up with more murders by police in every year since. And the Democrats have expanded the reach of the carceral state, now running a crooked cop at the top of their ticket and Black folks applauding for another generation of carceral enslavement. Okay, because people mobilize around issues. Kwame Ture said that revolutionaries organize against systems. And my own analysis is that every single successful revolutionary movement, and by the way, revolutionary movements are not always about guns, right? And a lot of the people in the radical left seem to forget that revolutions are often actually accomplished through ordinary political means, electoral and organizing means. Every single successful modern revolution has political party organizing at the core of it. And the Green Party now has this opportunity to, with a coalition of not just Muslims, not just Black Muslims, but basically Muslims, Black folk, the whole anti-imperialist, anti-fascist coalition, we have the capability of actually creating sustained power. And I've already said that I'm in this to win this. If we do not land that knockout punch and get the White House in this fall, then I'm running for governor of the state of California in 2026. Nobody's ever heard of the Democrat or Republican candidates for that position, and they certainly ain't been on Breakfast Club, right? So I think that if we fundraise right, that's going to be an even money race. Okay.
Well, I have to ask you because I can hear what the pushback is going to be in my head.
Go ahead.
And people know my own feelings about this aside, but the pushback is going to be, well, if we're talking about, the value of political organizing and the criticism the Green Party is getting is that there's not enough attention to local races.
Yeah.
Is that feeding is going from VP to running for governor, feeding into this perception that there is an unwillingness to do more discrete, localized, on the ground work?
Exactly the opposite. Yeah. So, I've already lined up a slate of congressional candidates, mayoral candidates, gubernatorial candidates, 2 people that have already agreed to run for Senate. Okay. And these are people that from my personal network that I've called into action. So we have a whole team. We already have a plan for national coordination of multiple campaigns across multiple states. So to be perfectly honest, and I'm just going to be blunt about this, running for Congress in my local district here would be too easy for me to win. It's a waste of me as a chess piece.
You really think that, Butch?
Without any question, no one has ever heard of Salud Carbajal. I would bury him, completely.
Yeah, but Butch, I can't speak to your district at all, but we've seen some things. We all sat here and watched India Walton win the mayoral race and Buffalo, fully win the primary. And then have the incumbent run a write-in campaign, His name wasn't even on the ballot, and win. And now, of course, he's stepping down to do sports betting.
Let me just explain something. People, so that's it. I definitely understand why it would look that way from the outside. The people that are on the inside know what the fundraising capacity of the Muslim community actually is. Okay, I'm gonna just tell you this. So I had a meeting with Anwar Khan, founder of Islamic Relief. Okay, Islamic Relief raised something like $3.5 billion over a decade, and literally got mentored on exactly the way to structure your entire fundraising network. We are, without any question, what's going to happen is that the Muslim community is going to step up and step in. And when people see the leadership that comes out of that from a fundraising standpoint, from an organizational discipline standpoint, And when we combine that with what the Green Party has already been able to do in establishing electoral access across the country and having all of these local officials, community organizers that have been in place and struggling for decades, when we pour, new avenues of support into that, when we start building out the red, black, and green party in places like Atlanta, in places like Philly, in places like Detroit, all I'm going to say is that the odds of me coming from where I came from in Washington, D.C., and standing at this particular precipice where we are at now, the odds of me getting to here are so much longer than the odds of us winning an election in 2028. Right? People have to understand that political parties are not actually in the Constitution. They're not part of our, there is nothing that says we have to have team blue and team red. They've created this environment wherein they create a normalization of their institutions and the expectation of their victory. The biggest advantage that I have in the political arena is the same one that I had in the academic arena. No part of this or this has ever been colonized by them. So I assess the capacity for success on the basis of the objective facts on the ground, not their propaganda. And I'm telling
Dr. Ware, yeah.
I'm telling you with clarity that do not bet against us.
Well, I have been feeling a little in the doldrums and depressed about the state of the world. And I really appreciate the energy and the commitment and the thoughtfulness that you're bringing to these issues. My last question for you, quickly before we wrap up, is just that you mentioned funding. You mentioned how the support of the Muslim community is enabling you to think kind of bigger and broader about the possibilities that are available to the Green Party going forward. So many people did open their wallets. So many working class people and poor people opened their wallets and gave to the Bernie campaign in 2020 and 2016. And they felt burned by that, given how he ramped down his campaign and derailed the revolution after those two efforts. And I think people are still feeling pretty gun shy about opening their wallets again. Yeah. So I do wonder if you have anything to say to folks about, as they're making the choice to maybe have hope and be willing to put financial commitments behind something like the Green Party again, or Green Party candidates locally again. I mean, what would you say to people who are a little gun shy now?
I can understand that. My first response actually to your question, Briahna, is imagine if Bernie had run as a Green instead of laying down in front of the Democratic establishment. We could be in a very, very different place by now.
Or at least have done a dirty break.
Exactly.
To demonstrate the failures of the Democratic Party, say, I'm leaving because they treated me this way. Yeah.
Well, and let's just be clear about what that would actually look like in practice, right? So a simple thing like just reaching the 5% threshold in the national popular vote in this electoral cycle will guarantee the Green Party electoral ballot access across the country and also $10 million in federal funding. Now, we've spent half of our campaign resources just getting electoral access. So what if Bernie had done that? What if Bernie had actually established a viable third-party alternative? What would be the positionality now of that kind of movement? Well, that's what we can build into the future. If Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin can hold up an entire progressive agenda by themselves, then what can a third party, an independent third party driven by people that are actually concerned with freedom, what can they do to shape the American environment? And that's exactly what the Democrats are afraid of. And that's exactly why they've been trying to sue to keep us off the ballot. The good part for us is that they never saw a brother like me coming. If they had, if they knew what I know, then they never, they would have had, Jill Stein, she never would have been able to find my number. But it's too late. Now that I'm in this fight, you're going to have to peel the battle armor off of me. We are going to keep going until we give the American people a viable alternative, because these two corporate murderous parties ain't it.
Dr. Butch Ware, thank you so much for joining us here today. Tell the people where they can find more about you, from you on the internet and beyond, how they can be in touch.
At Butch Ware on every single platform, I think except for TikTok, where it's Butch.Ware. Follow us, help spread the word. One thing that you can do is bit.ly/Steinware, and you can donate. You can join our voter registration network and our volunteer network. We are building an army, and we definitely need volunteers. We need soldiers in this struggle for freedom.
All right. Thank you. That was really compelling. I really appreciate you joining us. Thanks to all the listeners for tuning in. You know, you can get an additional episode of Bad Faith Podcast on Mondays at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. If you can't get enough, this coming Monday is October 7th, and I am looking forward. It's a weird way to say it, but I have planned for some really compelling content marking the 1-year anniversary of this genocide that has been going on in Gaza. If you're interested in that, thanks again for tuning in. And as always, take care of yourselves and keep the faith. Hey, YouTube. Thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.